Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&As. Got a bunch of questions and one over on Floatplane, so let's head over to there first. IB Bangin, sorry, I'm a child sometimes. I enjoy that name. IB Bangin wants to know about sync and a Sony RGB monitor and how that has to do with RGB cables and everything. I'm not going to read through the question because I don't want to confuse anybody. I want to skip right to the answer. But I also want to say that the fact that you're even asking this question is my fault. I should have had a very clear video on sync years ago. I tried to write it up on the website, but it's still so confusing. I really need like a quality video with some good B-roll and visual cues and stuff like that. Because if I'm doing my job right, you shouldn't have to ask these questions. But I'm always happy to answer them. So for now, I'm going to give you the short answer so you can get started with your setup and make sure everything's working. And someday soon, I'll do a fancier video on it, so it'll help everybody else. But basically, the answer to your direct question is you could pick up Genesis 1 and Atari Jaguar cables, both that are direct C-Sync. You don't need any sync strippers or anything else. And that should work perfect with your monitor, and you don't need anything else other than a BNC, or SCART to BNC adapter. Just a pass-through adapter. You don't have to worry about anything else. So just to get you started, both cable manufacturers should already know that. Definitely with Genesis 1, there was a confusion with the Jaguar, but that should have been cleared up a long time ago. So just buy the C-Sync versions of both, no sync strippers, and just get a pass-through SCART to BNC cable, and your Sony 1342Q should work fine. Now, here's some of the theory behind that. First of all, the SCART standard used composite video as sync, but that has some compatibility issues with certain devices, and if your cables aren't made perfectly, you could get some interference on that. So generally speaking, in the world that we all play in now with the retro games and all this stuff, it's best if you could always just use C-Sync, which is incredibly confusing because that stands for composite sync. So what that essentially means is you're taking just the composite sync out of the composite video signal, leaving Luma and Chroma out of that. So the terms are amazingly confusing, which is, I blame the people who named this stuff, of course. When it comes to sync strippers, that's really for a scenario that you know that you absolutely need it. So one of them would be the Sony PlayStation 1 and 2 do not have a direct C-Sync output from their multi-outs. You could do an internal mod, or you could use Luma, which works perfectly in all scenarios except for devices like Extron crosspoints and certain monitors, possibly yours. I've never used a 1342Q, but in case this comes up, while Luma performs fine, getting sync from Luma performs fine, it could cause compatibility issues with certain devices. So that's the time that you would want to use a sync stripper, just because now you know it's compatible, and that's pretty much it. There's some more advanced capture-esque scenarios and why you might need a sync stripper, but for just plugging it into a monitor, and in fact, even going through any kind of thing like an OSSC or RetroTank, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. If there's compatibility issues, use a sync stripper. If not, don't worry about it. And that's pretty much it. To answer your other questions, though, a sync stripper and a cable going through a sync stripper that's already built into a SCART to BNC cable isn't necessarily bad, but you're going to get some shift of the image, just a tiny bit, but you might notice it. And in my personal opinion, the more things that you have in the chain, the more there is for something to go wrong. So I strongly recommend that if you don't ever need a sync stripper, just to never use it in the chain at all, with some very some exceptions, like if you get yourself a G-SCART switch, especially the ones from 2019 on, you might just want to leave that sync regeneration on all the time because it's been designed very specifically for retro gaming and for safety. So it's totally cool to just leave that on, and there's no harm taking a C-Sync cable, running it through that, and having it output. And in fact, if you're going to use more than just a handful of consoles, the G-SCART switch is one of the best pieces of retro gaming equipment you can get now because it's designed specifically for us to make sure that you don't have to worry about anything in almost every scenario. So the whole C-Sync thing is confusing and annoying. Over the years, there's been bumps in the road because the wrong components were used inside the cables, the wrong leading people to believe that you needed a sync stripper in scenarios that you didn't. I was certainly guilty of that for a couple of things, which have been hopefully cleared up for a long time now. So I probably gave you a little bit more info than you wanted. I just wanted to make sure to give you the what first, what you needed. Just grab the Genesis One and the Atari Jaguar C-Sync cables and a pass-through SCART to BNC. And then that was just kind of more of the why. And hopefully I can get a good fancy video up about this soon. I'd like to work with Displaced Gamers because I love the visual cues they use in their videos. Their videos are geared more towards intermediate to advanced. And to be honest, a few of them I even have to rewind and to go back and rewatch something and go, oh yeah, that's what they meant by that. But you know, they probably have something on sync out there already that, yeah, I'm pretty sure they do. If you want some more info now. And I'd like to do my own version of that, just because sometimes if people are confused, watching two different ways of explaining something is a better way to grasp it. So excellent questions. I'll try to get on this soon, and hopefully I was able to get you started, at least to get your retro gaming setup going. So, good luck with your setup, and it's an awesome monitor, so have fun with that. Now over on Patreon, I'll start with the newest question first, because why not? Kirk said his son wants to get him an arcade cabinet for his upcoming 40th birthday. Happy birthday, by the way. We don't know much about them, but I've seen lots of different ones built by different people. I was wondering if you could give me some ideas of what to look for in terms of purchasing something that's playable with minimal input lag. Thanks for any help you could provide. So that is a question that's probably going to require some follow-up here, because that's kind of like saying, what's a car that's, sort of reliable? And I think I could try to get you started, but I'm going to have some follow-up questions. So first of all, are you insisting on using a CRT like I mostly do in most scenarios, or are you totally cool with LCD? If CRT is something that you're insisting on, you're probably going to want to just pick your favorite arcade game. For me, it would be like Outrun or Mortal Kombat. Take that giant machine home, make sure it's still working, and kind of enjoy that, and eventually build yourself in something like a JAMA Switch and a Raspberry Pi that then you could have all of the games. And, the input lag's okay, but the advantage is you have every arcade game now. And you could have a setup that requires some tinkering and will eventually require some maintenance. All CRTs are going to require maintenance at some point. All monitors are, but CRTs already are out for 20, 30 years, so they're going to require them much sooner. And, of course, the arcade boards themselves are going to need work and all of that. So it's kind of like owning a classic car. Even if you buy one that's fully restored and perfect, it's not something that you could just use every day and expect it to last forever. You're going to have to do some maintenance and some upkeep. Alternatively, you could find some mini arcades. I have a couple of them. I love them. There's going to be some videos in the next year on it. I've been slow about it because I'm really taking my time making these perfect, because I enjoy them, because they're still a CRT and they're still heavy, but they're tabletop-esque and they're 13-inch monitors. So it's something I could very easily carry around with me and not have to worry about any of that. So if that's what you need, let me know and I could point you in the right direction. On the flip side of things, though, if you're okay with LCD monitors, I would recommend getting one of the ones that you see at like Walmart. Justin from Console Kits wrote a website that you could put the arcade machine in that you'd like, and it tells you where's the cheapest one to get around you. I will definitely link to that wherever these videos are posted. And if you'd like something like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, pick one of those up and kind of just, it's kind of a halfway point, because you still have to assemble it, but it just works fine. And if you want to hack it for more games, you totally can. And, there's some pretty cool versions of it. And it's not perfect, but it's not supposed to be. It was never meant to be. It's meant to be an easy, lightweight way to get an arcade experience at home. Now, there's other ones that I have not had a chance to test yet that I'm really, really interested in. Lon from Lon.tv reviewed one. I think it's the one from @games, but I could be wrong. I'll try to find that link to Lon's video. But basically, it's something like the arcade 1-ups, except it also offers inputs, which means you could route a Mister or a Raspberry Pi through it. So once again, you're still going to require some tinkering. Still have the games that are built in that it's just kind of plug and play. But that's something that I think is pretty cool, because then you don't have to hack anything. You could just plug stuff in and do some very nice wire maintenance and have yourself something that you could build upon. And heck, if you get super, super into this, I might even find a way to use original arcade boards through it. And while it is an LCD screen, it's a computer monitor, so I'm assuming it's going to be well under a frame of lag. And the screen itself, so, if you interface a Mister to it, it's going to be pretty awesome. The only thing, and I'm sure I'm going to get some hatred for saying this, but the only thing that I don't generally recommend are people that sell like 3001 pre-built arcade machines. And I've seen people at trade shows, and I've seen them in person and other places, and I always ask the same question, and they always shut down and pretty much throw me off of their booth when I ask this. But it's when you and I, meaning, myself and anybody listening and anybody that hacks their own arcade machines and does MAME and stuff like that, when we're doing these things, we're buying and assembling, and we're making these things, and technically we're illegally downloading ROMs, but it's for hobby projects that we're doing for no financial gain. Whereas technically these people who are selling these 3001 things are stealing games, selling these pre-built consoles for, mostly they're like $2,000 and up. And now they're kind of forcing you to buy the stolen games. So I don't really that doesn't really sit well with me. And every time I talk about this, there's always a legion of trolls that's like, but you use ROM carts. That's the same. You're a hypocrite. Like, it's not the same at all. I don't have any financial gain whatsoever from stolen intellectual property. And a lot of these places do. And it kind of drives me crazy. But moral issues aside, the other thing is there's always going to be something that happens to one of these pre-built arcade machines. A software glitch, something needs to be replaced. And much like a classic car or anything else, if it's something that you've built yourself, you could already kind of figure it out. So if you buy the one that has the HDMI input to it, and you play the games that are on it to start. So it's something that, you and your son could do right away. You don't have to wait to hack something. You could just assemble the thing and start playing your games. And then eventually you want to interface a Mister into it, let's just say. And one day it kind of blips out. It's like, all right, well, let me format the SD card. That was real easy. Let me reload the ROMs. I remember how to do that. That wasn't too hard. And it becomes something that you could repair yourself fairly easily. So I think I talked way longer about this than you probably wanted. I imagine you probably just wanted me to say, hey, go buy this from, this link and it'll do what you want. It's just way more complicated than that. And there's both, maintenance as well as kind of moral issues involved in this. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of pushback on my response, but if you'd like and you have time before your birthday, either, if your birthday's coming up quick, just message me directly and I'll try to help. If you have another week or so, kind of respond to me in the comments and point me in the right direction. And the next time you ask, if I haven't gotten you what you needed already, I'll be able to give you a much more solid recommendation of where to look. Joseph Vessel said they purchased Battle Kid on Famicom, but heard about issues with the publisher releasing poor quality carts. How concerned should they be about putting this in their AVS or NT Mini? So there's a few things to worry about when it comes to poorly built cartridges, assuming they are. I don't really know anything about this particular one. The first one is beveled edges. So if you imagine the side of a table that's perfectly flat, that's a regular, a solid edge. And if you put that into a cartridge slot, you're essentially smashing the pins every time you enter it. Whereas a beveled edge, imagine like a T at the end, kind of pushes those cartridge pins aside, allowing room for the main cartridge to slide in. And without a beveled edge, you absolutely will wear your cartridge port down more than with it. But that's kind of a how long is that going to take type of thing. I personally wouldn't want to use a cart that it doesn't have a beveled edge, or if mine didn't, I would probably give it to somebody with a steady hand to just take a file and very carefully bevel it without touching any of the pins. I don't think I have a steady enough hand for that, so I'd pass that on to a friend or something. So that's one of them. And the other is voltage, but there's two kinds of voltage issues. One is the article that Renee initially wrote about 3.3 versus 5 volt flash. And that's not something that you would really normally have to worry about. That's something that's more along the lines of like longevity of the cart itself, good practices, stuff like that. It's kind of like eating bacon, right? Like, it's not good for me to eat bacon, but like, it's probably not what's going to kill me. So it's one of those things, right? However, there are some cartridges out there over the years that's not the problem. There's just some straight up poor designs, and it's sending too much voltage, and you could probably do some serious damage. The ones that I knew about, there was a NES multi-cart that was like 101, and there was a Neo Geo one that were both pretty bad, and I'm pretty sure that some people I know's consoles were damaged from that. So as long as it's not super bad like those, that was not nearly as common as the other one. So the ones that are like actual, damage could be done immediately, there was only a handful of those that I knew about personally. So if it's just something that doesn't have a beveled edge and it's not using the proper voltage translators, then you should be safe putting it into your AVS or NT Mini. If you're using an NT Mini and it's jailbroken, maybe just run the ROM. I know a lot of people buy these things because they prefer to use cartridges, but it's certainly a lot safer. And for the AVS, it's really your choice. It's probably not going to be as good as an original, but it's probably not going to kill your console right away. So, go back to the bacon analogy. Is it worth it to you? It's worth it to me, clearly, but I guess it's kind of the best way to describe it, but let me know if you need me to elaborate on anything specific. ABO Hiccups had a question about the official Wii Remote Rapid Charger set. Does anybody know where to get them at a reasonable price? And does anybody have any alternatives that last longer than the AA batteries that I've recommended? I don't know anywhere to buy those, and I don't know of any good third-party solutions. However, I always just use the Analogue batteries. I haven't had any problems with them. They take a while to charge, but they last pretty long. I'm very happy with that, and I think it's a really cost-effective solution because, I've had mine for years now, and they're still running fine. I haven't had any of them die. So I would stick with Analogues unless anybody knew of a very cool other solution for it. And if anybody knows of a good place to get them or a good third-party one, please post below and help out ABO Hiccups. Firebrand X said, Bob, since you're an expert on power circuitry, I'm not. Here's a question. If you have a Dreamcast and use, say, a GDMU with it, wouldn't it be possible to design a power board that skips 12 volts entirely and makes use of a 5-volt brick? Seems like only if the lens drives use the 12-volt supply and you're no longer using it, a 5-volt board would in theory work just fine. So there's a bunch of stuff I have to say about this. First of all, yeah, that sounds awesome. I believe that would work. I think the only other peripheral that wouldn't is the karaoke add-on, as far as I know at least, because when I pulled, if you do the whole pull 12-volt thing like I talked about in my video, I haven't had any problems with my Dreamcast since. So that should be fine. However, designing power circuitry is way harder than one would imagine. It's certainly, it's easy to overlook because you could design a power circuit that works and you think everything's fine. And I had just finished a post up on the website about specifically Dreamcast power supplies, which is funny because you posted this at least a full day before I put that write-up up there. So it's funny, we were both thinking about the same things. But, a lot of stuff out there, a lot of these replacement internal power supplies are not as good as people make them out to be. And I think people just get on this kick of upgrades, which I completely understand, of course, but it's like, all right, I'm going to update to the GDMU. I'm going to get a new 3D printed this. I'm going to get a fan. I'm going to put a fuse that self-heals in it. What else do we got? Power supply? Cool. Like, I think it's kind of that people just get sucked into upgrading, which obviously I love and I'm a fan of, but some things you just don't need to upgrade is the honest truth. And a lot of times you hear people say like, oh, but there's so much less heat, but it removes something you don't need. And there's less heat, but there wasn't too much to begin with in most of these cases. So my suggestion would be, if you want to do some upgrade like this, you got to do some serious research. I believe Chris Z2600, the guy, the co-author of the DC Digital. Why can't I talk today? I believe he did a really great power supply for the Dreamcast that requires a Pico PSU, which then means that you have to go find a good Pico PSU. And when I bought two last year, I sent detailed pictures to a friend who actually is an expert in power circuitry. And he told me, the one on the left, throw it in the garbage. The one on the right, that one should be good enough. And these were both equally priced, both from reputable sellers. So it's one of those things where you just got to be so careful. So if somebody who really truly understood power circuits in and out, which I don't, but at least I know that I don't. If somebody who truly understood it did a really great conversion of the circuit to fit with exactly something like a really good quality triad brick to just supply 5 volts, I think that would be a great idea, but there would have to be a lot of testing so you'd have to combine a group of people or person that knows how to design and test power circuits and give that to a different group of people that knows how to test power circuits to verify. Even anything else that I do on my own, I always have other people verify as well. 2 sets of eyes are always better than one. So while I think that's an awesome idea, even then I would have to have very specific proof that this is good. And even after that, let's just say all of the perfect scenario happened. Christoph modifies his design to include all of the parts that you need. We put up the triad brick, and then we have a bunch made, and we open source the project. How do you know that everybody that's been making them afterwards uses the same quality components on the board? How do you know that Triad doesn't change their design on their PSU? And this stuff happens all the time. So that's the type of thing that makes me really nervous. Whereas if you have a stock power supply and it stops working, recap it, look for any damage on the board. You're probably going to get it working after that. And now you've bought yourself 20 more years on a power supply that should be fine because it's designed for that setup. So I'll talk about this a little more in next week's podcast because, I get to talk about the post that I wrote. But the short version to what you're saying is, yeah, I think it's awesome. I would love to see something like that. But it would need to be the perfect storm for me to buy it. ABO Hiccups wants to know if I think the Analogue Pocket will be delayed due to COVID-19. I think everything is going to be delayed due to it. So yes, absolutely. And I also wouldn't bust anybody's chops about it either. Not saying that you are, just general statement. I personally am expecting everything to be delayed. I'm just going to be cool about it and keep my mouth shut because in almost every case, it's nobody's fault. Mark Main said they just bought their first PVM, a Sony 14N5U, and they found it on Facebook for $20, but it seems to only have S-video inputs. Is there any way you can get RGB into it? Most likely not. Some models you could do some kind of RGB mods. However, that doesn't mean anything for your total gaming experience. Having any PVM, in my opinion, is going to get you a sharper and what I prefer in most cases to be a better visual experience than a consumer-grade TV. There's some exceptions. Some people prefer the lower line count. I think Neo Geo, I'm used to seeing Neo Geo on a lower line count. But generally speaking, even composite video is going to look better on a PVM. And also, S-video looks awesome. I mean, it's very close to RGB. It's closer to RGB than it is to composite. I think that's a really great way to put that into perspective. So if this is your first PVM, all that means is now, you might have to invest some money in some S-video cables if you already owned RGB. If you don't own any other cables yet, except maybe composite, buy a bunch of really good S-video cables. And if you ever need to stream or play on a flat screen, get a RetroTink 2X Pro and you're set. I think I am very guilty of falling down the rabbit hole of tweaking the best and the sharpest because I'm curious about it. But at the end of the day, as long as I'm playing on any CRT, I'm happy. and the sharper the CRT, usually the better. Some, depending on the situation. So, respectfully, if I were you, I really wouldn't care. I would just say, look, I got a PVM for $20. I'm going to hook my S-Video consoles up to it. And if I feel the need to get more, I would never get rid of that one. Maybe just you're going to turn into a crazy person like me and start collecting CRTs. But what you have is an awesome monitor. And while I'm pretty sure you can't mod it for RGB, I would still be happy with it. Wave 4 wants to know about the Super NT and Mega SG Scanline filters. They're having trouble figuring out what the scanline depth and scanline width settings do, and they've dialed in a setting that they think looks alright, but when I break down the differences between the two. So I don't really know, and I don't really use fake scanlines, and it's just, for me, I appreciate the artwork on a flat panel TV, the same as I do on a CRT. I just, at the moment, I haven't found scan lines on a flat panel that I think look the way that I would like them to. So not only that, but I don't really include scan lines in any of my reviews anymore, because unless you're watching it on the exact same format that I've shot it on, it's going to look terrible. So if I have it rendered in 4K 60, unless you watch it 4K 60, it's going to look bad. If you look at it on your phone, it's going to look really bad. And even then, depending on the YouTube compression, it might look way off. So I haven't done any in-depth scanline testing in a long time. But one thing that I will always suggest is, if you dialed something in that looks good to you, that's the right answer, because there's no technical issues with this. Scanlines don't add lag. They don't, there's no technical factual suggestion. It's all opinion based. So if you've dialed in settings that look fine, I would just consider it a win and leave it be. If you'd like to look more into this, I would go to the My Life in Gaming videos, because they do appreciate artificial scan lines, and they go into detail a lot on how they prefer tweaking it. But for me personally, I just, it's not something I spend too much time with. So if you have something you like, you've already won. And if you want more info, I apologize. I don't think I'm the best person to really comment on that. Kelv SYC had a pretty interesting question about devices, or cables specifically, that output composite video over SCART. So for anybody that's not aware of SCART history, it was a cable standard in Europe that the same connector could either output composite video or RGB. Or I guess in some cases both, and then the target device would figure out what it's compatible with. And there are scenarios where you could find things like console cables that are composite video over SCART, and those won't be compatible with the OSSC or the RetroTink 2X SCART, because those are expecting RGB signals. So the question is it better to use a bidirectional SCART adapter to break out SCART to RCA? Is there a device that converts the signal? My personal choice would be to buy a different cable. Unless there was a very specific reason that you needed to do so, I think that it would actually be much more efficient and less expensive overall than dealing with converters and everything else. Especially because, how many consoles could you possibly have with SCART that has composite video that wouldn't also offer RGB? So Genesis, Super Nintendo, Saturn, PlayStation, I'm sure all of those could have composite over SCART, but you could also just buy an RGB SCART cable and instantly upgrade your signal. If you did need to do something with that original cable, I definitely would not suggest a converter of any kind, because it's just going to add cost to the signal. I would just use a very cheap breakout adapter, which you could still find them on Amazon and eBay, that breaks out SCART to RCA connectors, and it breaks out composite and left and right audio. And that's definitely how I would handle it. First choice would be just buy new cables. Once again, I know people are on a budget. I know there might be specific reasons, but if a conversion box might cost you $12 and a new composite video cable might cost you $8, depending on the console. So just keep all of that in mind. And your final question, how about composite or S-Video over HD15? I did custom cables for a few years in my setup, and if I had the type of setup that was stationary and never moved, I set up all my consoles and I just press a button on the Switch to play them and never touch it, it would have been awesome. You could do anything you want. You could invent your own connector. It doesn't really matter. But it was a nightmare for me because nothing's stationary. I'm always pulling stuff out, moving stuff, testing a different cable through my setup. So I found that just going to regular SCART or component video are by far the best for me. But if you have a stationary setup, do whatever you want. Just keep in mind, though, that because RGB SCART was an actual standard, we have a lot of people putting a lot of focus on devices for retro games using that standard. So you're not going to get the benefits out of like a basic switch for like a VGA switch that you would out of a G-SCART switch or something like that. So all excellent questions, but for me personally, I would choose the least path of resistance or whichever was the most cost effective depending on the scenario. My RetroFix was following up with our conversation from last week that I believe involved a full setup going into an XM29 monitor. And they said that the G-SCART switch with regeneration didn't work on a lot of the consoles going directly into the XM29. So I would just double check the settings and back. I can't remember if it was my XM29 or my Mitsubishi Megaview that had switches that toggled each RGB-S input to either 75 ohm or TTL. So you would want to make sure that matches up. But if that still doesn't solve it, then yeah, your idea of the 203 RXI should be fine. And as you said, yes, that would also add external controls for centering, level, and peak. And it also would give you 2 more inputs because they would be VGA inputs now, which would be a cool way to integrate VGA devices into the setup. So G-SCART with a custom SCART to VGA cable going into the Extron. In fact, one of the RXI's inputs doesn't have audio for whatever reason, so that's cool. Now you could take advantage of that breakout through the G-SCART and the cable that you have made, and then use the other 2 to route VGA inputs. And so as long as that works, then it's a perfectly great solution. I'd still have my 203 RXI. I did integrate it into my XM29 setup at the time. So yeah, I would just give that a shot, and make sure too, you're probably going to need to toggle sync stripping or sync regeneration on the G-SCART in order for the RXI to recognize the signal as well, because I think it usually looks for higher voltage signals. Chrisbanachek has 2 questions. The first is they have a scaler called the Crystalio 2 and wants to know if there's any way that they could integrate it with their consoles or the LG OLED or Sony CRT TVs or whatever. I haven't used one of those, but I believe that it had some specific uses for deinterlacing and line doubling that people liked. I could be wrong. It's been a long time since I've read up on it, but I would check out Fuda's site. He has a whole bunch of different reviews and stuff like that on there that really dig deep into scalers, that especially ones that were designed for not gaming but could be used for gaming in pretty unique and interesting ways. So I would check out his site for more info on that. Just Google it. It's it should come right up. Just Google, like, I'll try to find a link to the exact review. If I could find it, I'll put it in the description for you. And the second question is, you have a Heiko desoldering station and would like to start working on skills. However, you'd also like to purchase a desoldering station because it sounds like they make a significant difference in the overall quality, time, and cleanliness of work. Yeah. Can I recommend a solid quality model that's relatively inexpensive and good for a beginner? And are there any other tools I should consider that I'd recommend which make a significant difference in results? So your first question, the ZD-915 is a cheap desoldering station. It's about $100. It's between $90 and $130 depending on the day. It's linked right in my Amazon store, which is linked in the description of all of these under tools. I love mine. I've had people tell me that they're much more expensive Heiko ones work better, but I have no problems and no complaints at all with mine, especially coming from that other one that was a gun only, whereas this is the station with a gun attached to it. The gun only one was terrible. I ruined at least one Genesis with that thing. As far as other tools, both liquid flux and paste flux, and you don't use them together, but there'll be scenarios where one will be better than the other. I like using paste flux for surface mount components because it also is a little sticky, keeps the components in there. Good. You said you have a good soldering station already, so other than that, just good tips. Make sure your tip is always clean to get really good tip cleaner, or just a bunch of the cheap ones, and you'll go through them pretty quickly. But I mean, the soldering and soldering stations, as well as flux, are probably the biggest differences I've made in any of my modding. And, you know, I always am honest about it. I'm not a great modder. So for me to be able to do some of these fairly complicated mods sometimes is a really good reflection on the tools that I'm using and the people who taught me. So, yeah, absolutely would recommend for a cheaper one, the ZD915. And you already have a good station, so just get good things to supplement it. Good flux, good solder, and then of course, you know, good tips and solder cleaner and stuff like that. And you know, in the tools section, I think I have a few other things like I do. There were a lot of people that disagreed, but I have this one screwdriver that's rechargeable that Dan used. And it's, you know, it's meant for small things. It's not like you're probably not going to get console screws out with that. But I found this was perfect for working inside consoles. And then any basic cheap power screwdriver, like the small ones, not the ones that are like drills, like just the cheap smaller ones, I use for the bigger stuff. And all of those things have made my life a lot easier. So hopefully that points you all in the right direction. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thanks so much to everybody that participates in these. I really do enjoy them. And if you're new to all of this, ask any question you'd like wherever it is that you support in the latest support post. So the way these things work, I can't really go back and sift through older posts for newer comments, and there's no just comment section that I could check. So wherever the latest post might be, like this one's number 101. So if you have a question for next week for 102, just find this one, whether it's Floatplane, Patreon, wherever else, post your question there, and I'll get to it next week. And if I don't, it's always a mistake. So please either message me or re-ask, and I will get to it as soon as I can. A couple times I've deleted segments by accident and stuff like that before. So oops, sorry about all that. And also, I do have to leave the YouTube comments on because of algorithm reasons, but this is respectfully a thank you to everybody that supports. I do answer thousands of questions on all of my other videos, but respectfully, I just, these are a thank you and an interaction between myself and the people that support. So please excuse me if I don't respond to any of them on YouTube. I just don't ever check these videos on YouTube. So as always, thank you so much to everybody that supports. You're what's keeping all this alive, and I will see you next week.